There was one really interesting example that you and I have touched on previously regarding folic acid in pregnancy.
Folate this is the vitamin B9, right? This is the essential precursor in this very, how do you say, complex pathway of methylation. But even more importantly, it's the essential substrate when you're building new building blocks of life, which is the DNA and RNA synthesis, right? When you think about what's happening with females when they're pregnant, of course, they're creating new life. There's a huge amount of fresh DNA being synthesized, right? Which just means it sucks all the folate out of your body, which is why women need to get an extra supplementation of this vitamin B9, the folate. On this conversion of the folic acids through your methylation pathway, there's a few very critical enzymes, of which one is really absolutely the bottleneck. This one is called MTHFR. And basically, it converts one, let's say, part of the folate story to another. And in a lot of people, this enzyme has a significantly lower activity, which means that your folate is not being activated, is not being converted. Basically, it's being discarded from the system. Now, for us adults, that creates a lot of minor annoyances, right? But then when you're thinking about the pregnancy, it becomes even more critical, right? Because there you're actually providing the substrate of new life, right? Of new DNA synthesis. So again, when you're thinking about how do I support my growing fetus, my baby in the best possible way, right? There is a folate you can buy, a regular vitamin B9, or a methyl folate, which is an activated form of this vitamin B9. And both can be bought in a regular pharmacy. One is maybe a little bit more expensive, but not much, but it does bypass this one critical step, right? So it would be the same recommendation. Yes, you do need a folate precursor for your healthy pregnancy, but maybe you should just consider which one you're taking, right? The entire pathway, the kind of the deficiencies on this pathway, it's upwards of 20% in terms of the prevalence in the human population. So being aware of these, let's say, methylation stories is really quite important.
Welcome back to Biohacking Eve, Health Optimization for Women with Judith Mueller, where we shine a light on everything that will help you reach your best self as a woman, as unique and individual as only you can be. Live long and prosper, my friend. Hello, everyone. Today I'm joined by Dr. Enej Kuscer, who is the CEO of The New. The New is a digital twin platform that integrates a comprehensive 360-degree multi-omics analysis, which basically means that The New is leveraging genome, epigenome, blood, microbiome, wearables, and other health data inputs to deliver highly personalized health insights and precision optimization health strategies. Enej, lovely to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Fantastic. Could you tell us a little bit about how this system works in practice? What do I actually see and have to do from a consumer point of view?
Yeah, so it's really as easy as possible. So it's an open platform where people can upload their data if they already have them. People can go online and purchase the test kits from us directly, or they can use third-party testing, etc. New is really all about that one place where you can connect all of your data, integrate that, and get really amazing insights out of what your biology is doing, how you can optimize that health, and so on, interact with your, let's say, digital twin, right? In terms of, let's say, two cases of a user experience, one is somebody that is completely new to the field, has never done any of that stuff, has been listening about health span and longevity and optimization or whatever, or personalized health, but maybe never ventured into it themselves. So they can go online, just go to our website, find the shop. They can buy the whole, either from a very basic testing, again, if they just want to wet their toes first, or they want to go all in and see the, as you mentioned, the genome, the epigenome, the gut biome, the blood biomarkers, and so on, right? You can buy the test kits, you get it delivered to your home, you do your saliva sampling, a stool sampling, and then you do a blood analysis at the local lab. And then all of that data gets integrated into the platform, into your profile, into your digital twin, and then you see the outcomes, the recommendations, your biological age clocks, and so on. On the other hand side, like I said, also, if you just want to wet your toes, you can just maybe start very simply, just maybe some basic genetic tests and some very minor, like an annual health checkup, blood profile. And you can already start getting a lot of insights from that. But then the more you get comfortable with your story, the more you build out, oh, I want to know more about my gut biome and how does that affect my health, or where's my epigenetic story evolving. On the other hand side, the persona number two would be somebody that is really living it, right? So they've been doing that for years. They're very much aware of, they may even call themselves the biohackers or whatever, right? So they've done maybe at least a 23andMe genome and a few blood tests in the past, and maybe a gut biome or not. They have the data, right? So if they've been using service providers that allow them to get access to raw data, they will be able to download that and just upload into the new platform. So again, with us, you really are the owner of your data. We are the custodian. It's highly encrypted, highly secure, and so on. But you are the master of your data, right? So if you bring your own stuff, just upload it and it gets processed and it gets incorporated in kind of your historical biological profile. The problem out there is that many of those companies do not give you access to raw data. So in that case, if you've done some of these types of tests, you may only get a very simplified PDF report that will say eat more broccoli and less spinach. You maybe don't even know why, but you will not actually get to see what are the kind of the biomarkers behind it. So the raw data is important.
And actually, speaking of raw data, obviously I would have that from a consumer point of view, but how could I integrate working with my clinicians on that, my healthcare providers, if I wanted
Yeah.
to?
Yeah. So this is really where new shines, where the current, let's say, primary focus of the new activities is aimed at, is really working with practitioners. And of course, with the end consumers via the practitioners, because there's still so many very, let's say, complex things to understand about your health journey, your health optimization. It's always good to work with a professional, right? So whether that's a dietitian or a nutritionist or a longevity medicine practitioner, etc. The data flow is then really seamless. The clinician or the practitioner works with their clients or their patients. They basically oversee the sampling and so on. And then basically they are also the ones that can help guide the client through their digital twin experience and the kind of prioritization of the challenges, et cetera, et cetera.
Super. Let's get to the nitty gritty. Given there were women's podcasts, what are the sort of surprising insights that you've seen around that topic?
There's many areas that are very important for us to differentiate between men's health and women's health, right? So, while when we're thinking about health optimization and longevity, there's, I don't know if we could call it like an 80-20 rule, or I don't know the statistics on that, or probably it will be hard to gauge, but yes, for sure, eat well, take care of your nutrition and diet, exercise, maybe do an occasional fast, pay attention to your sleep. All these things, yes, they're important, right? They're important for everyone. Then you come to your, okay, it's already started to become a little bit more, specific when you're thinking gut health and this and so on. But when you're looking at the difference between male and female, it really starts becoming very different in terms of the reproductive health, the hormonal journey of us from teenage years onwards as we evolve as very different types of beings. Men produce their sperm for their entire lives and they are fertile basically until more or less their 90s or even basically until the end. Whereas female, they're born with a finite set of eggs that's defined basically already with during the I forget which week during the pregnancy, etc. And that's it, right? and it's a very fast decline, rapid decline in terms of the reproductive health. And we are actually, interestingly, one of the few species out there that even have this phenomenon called menopause, right? So there's only a few other whales and probably some other exotic species, but like most primates don't have menopause, right? And also going through the monthly cycle of the whole kind of play or concerto of your hormonal balance and the way the body each time is preparing whether it may get pregnant or not, etc. So there really is a lot of aspects that we are thinking about how to maintain your reproductive health, which may drag down a lot of other health related issues if it declines too rapidly. But then on top of that, we add the pregnancy, right? Because there, again, the male is the donor of the sperm, easy done, right? But for female, you're then taking care of two living beings, right? Which they need to, now all of a sudden you have the father's genetics in there as well, which has different metabolic pathways, different hormonal pathways, and so on. So all of a sudden, it's not just your own, let's say, metabolism optimization, but you need to think, what is my ideal support in terms of the nutrition, the minerals, and so on and so forth that the fetus requires. So it really becomes way more complex. But yeah, it's a very good question, and they're using a systemic approach such as new or probably there are others, but really trying to understand your body holistically, right? You will be able to address a lot of these issues much more with the knowledge of what is going on within the system, rather than seeing that something is not working and then trying basically all sorts of solutions just whether something else might work. We've seen, we've seen quite a few women that came onto the platform that had for many years trouble with, for example, fertility, getting pregnant, and so on. And of course, the platform will identify many of the key features: inflammation, gut biome dysbiosis, right? It will be stress levels, hormonal imbalances, and so on, right? And when you put all of those things, again, rebalance provides that reset of the system with the supplementation, with the dietary changes, and so on. Many of these within months are able to, conceive that they haven't been able before. And they've been taking all sorts of hormonal therapies and this and that. Or even when you then think about longevity, and again, this has not just been with our platform. I saw that as N of one case report studies from, let's say, lady biohackers out there, that this is not an uncommon feature. When you think about menopause, women who did not want to accept that they declined too soon, and they started to really look at all sorts of biomarkers. How can they improve this and that? We've seen that in our case, that years into the menopause, women have been able to reverse their biological age and actually experiencing the period and all the kind of premenopausal stories again, right? So you can really do a lot about keeping your cells and your body or biology functioning healthier and younger for much longer. But again, it takes that systemic approach to not just going after one, let's say, pathology that you are seeing or observing, but actually trying to understand why that is happening and which are all the contributing factors, right?
And I think there was one really interesting example that you and I have touched on previously regarding folic acid in pregnancy. You want to talk
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, for sure. Folate is the essential, this is the vitamin B9, right? This is the essential precursor in this very, how do you say, complex pathway of methylation. So C1 donor, right? This is a one carbon unit, right? Which is important for synthesis of a number of hormones like serotonin, dopamine, and so on. So but at the same time, as a methylation, let's say, story, it's about regulation of activities of enzymatic, of protein activities and so on. But even more importantly, again, as a carbon one donor, it's the essential substrate when you're building new building blocks of life, which is the DNA and RNA synthesis, right? When you think about what's happening with females when they're pregnant, of course, they're creating new life. There's a huge amount of fresh DNA being synthesized, right? Which just means it sucks all the folate out of your body, right? Which is why women need to get an extra supplementation of this vitamin B9, the folate, to support these methylation pathways and the carbon one synthesis. Now, with this pathway, there is a very interesting and to me, an evolutionary, not very clear phenomenon of this MTHFR deficiency, because very often there are enzymes in our metabolic pathways that are either overexpressed or underexpressed that we have as a species accumulated through time. And we have these things called single nucleotide polymorphisms, which means this is how we differ from one to another on single nucleotide changes. And usually this meant evolutionary that at some point in the history, for some subpopulation, a higher activity of an enzyme or a lower activity of enzyme was beneficial. And so that mutation took place and then took hold, and it's still prevalent today. And very often these are not necessarily fully detrimental. It's just a certain type of interesting advantage in certain type of environment. But with MTHFR, I'm not entirely sure where the kind of evolutionary story of this gene is. But on this conversion of the folic acids through your methylation pathway, there's a few very critical enzymes, of which one is really absolutely the bottleneck, but there are another 4 or 5 that are involved. This one is called MTHFR, and it's called methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase. And basically, it converts one, let's say, part of the folate story to another. So it's a step in between. And in a lot of people, this enzyme has a lower activity, it's a significantly lower activity, which means that your folate is not being activated, is not being converted. Basically, it's being discarded from the system. Now, for us adults, that creates a lot of minor annoyances, right? So if we are MTHFR deficient, if we have a lower activity of this enzyme, it means that your neurotransmitter, your hormonal pathways and so on are more poorly supported, for example, right? Which means you have, let's say, a smaller buffer zone of what you can handle in terms of serotonin, dopamine, all these, which very often leads in terms of consequence to mood swings, moodiness, anxiety, depression, all these kind of things. Right? And then people would often say, that's just who I am. The reality is you may just have a lower activity of this enzyme, which means that if you supplement correctly and bypass the defect of these enzymes, you may quite likely, let's say, rebalance your more flow state of your mind, of your cognition, right? But then when you're thinking about the pregnancy, it becomes even more critical, right? Because there you're actually providing the substrate of new life, right? Of new DNA synthesis. So again, when you're thinking about how do I support my growing fetus, my baby in the best possible way, right? For example, when we spoke about this gene, there is a folate you can buy, a regular vitamin B9, or a methyl folate, right? Which is an activated form of this vitamin B9. And both can be bought in a regular pharmacy. One is maybe a little bit more expensive, but not much, right? But it does bypass this one critical step, right? So it would be the same recommendation. Yes, you do need a folate precursor for your healthy pregnancy, but maybe you should just consider which one you're taking, right? So that's one interesting example that it's just one out of many to think in terms of how do I really provide that optimal nutrition, optimal kind of mineral, vitamin, and other support, etc., etc., for my own body as well as for my potentially my
And the thing is, if I
kids.
remember correctly, it's about 20% of the population that has this deficiency. So especially as
Yeah,
a, I
yeah,
think that's
yeah,
one hell of a
yeah,
risk to take to
yeah,
not know that.
yeah. It's really high. It's not. I would not say that the MTHFR, particularly the gene, has a homozygous minor prevalence of 20%, but the entire pathway, the kind of the deficiencies on this pathway, I think it's upwards of 20% in terms of the prevalence in the human population. So being aware of these, let's say, methylation stories is really quite important.
And sticking with parenting, I find it quite interesting when you say if a couple has several kids, for example, when you told what the genetic similarities but also differences between the kids, which are siblings, which have the same set of parents, the same sort of input theoretically, but not necessarily in
Mhm.
practice. That's also a very interesting story.
Absolutely. And again, we're talking a very similar analogy, right? So here, so you have in the same story as I said earlier, you have enzymes that are more active, you have enzymes that are less active, you have pathways that are overexpressed, underexpressed, etc. Yeah? And you always get two copies of a gene from your parents, one from each, right? And then the genes can be either dominant, if there's one copy of something, it just takes control, or recessive, which means that it's usually silent. So it needs to have two copies, right? In order for it to, be able to voice its opinion, right? Or you have an equal strength that each one plays, contributes to a role. And so, first of all, you need to know what type of genes those are, right? So are they the dominant player, the recessive players, or not? And then you look at how these stories combine. So again, well, let's say mother and father might have a certain number of genes in one area of, let's say, related to your hormones or mood and stress, anxiety, whatever, which is quite often in terms of kids. And you may have one copy of each here and here, but how they recombine this, that the child can get two of the dominant versions, two of the recessive versions, or one from each, right? So while you have kids, they can have completely different stories, how the genetics, even in all of us who are healthy people, right? So we're not talking here about any kind of genetic diseases and so on. We're talking about different, let's say, evolutionary stories that came along through these polymorphisms, etc., how they eventually combine in us that create us kind of unique, right? And it's interesting because a lot of these then also plays a very interesting role in your, let's say, for example, your gut, your epithelial cells, right? Because while we talk about a lot about the gut biome and the microbial health and so on and so forth, and people say diet, right? So fiber and this and fermented food, etc., etc. But there is this also very huge, because it's almost like a symbiotic relationship, right? So there is a huge influence between the host and the bacteria in there. So the type of the cells, the type of mucus, the type of the adhesive proteins and so on that are on your own cells will create a hosting environment for the type of bacteria that like to flourish there. So even within the same family who tends to eat the same food, lives in the same household, you will actually have some aspects of your gut biome that are amazingly equal, right? Similar. But then there will be aspects of your gut biome that are very unique, right? And it's going to be very, it's interesting stories how these, uh, uh, let's say, um, journeys evolve.
Are there any particular genes where you would put a lot of attention on in terms of mutations for children in particular?
What we discussed earlier, MTHFR is definitely one of them, right? For example, this really is a very prevalent and very important story that impacts your hormonal balance, your overall kind of development, etc. Other than that, I would say there's a lot of aspects that relate to your, let's say, nutrition, your nutritional uptake. For example, when we think about when you go through this massive period of changes in your body composition and structure, the bone and so on, you really want to know how can you handle, for example, your vitamin D pathways, etc. Yeah? So again, there is a number of genes that are either how responsive you are to synthesizing that from the exposure to the sun, from converting that into in your liver to an active form, uptake into the cell, then gene response, because this is actually a regulator, etc., etc. So again, the same as in MTHFR, there are a number of genes involved. And on top of that, there's a number of bacteria in your gut that synthesize or not the vitamin D, right? For example, when you think about the kind of growth of your body, the immune system, the bone, the muscle, even the neuronal developments, a lot of these kind of vitamin mineral pathways, the nutritional uptake, so the gut uptake, etc., is really important to know whether you're well supported or whether a minor amount of supplementation might be beneficial. The same goes with kind of B vitamin pathways, the K vitamin, and so on, which again is very important for growth. So I think here we are more focused on the nutritional and metabolic support and hormonal support rather than maybe the more longevity aspects of, again, if we really want to be very, very detailed or very fussy, but then we face the other problem that we get too zealous about trying to control just about everything, right? Because again, I think that children can metabolize a lot of things still with a much greater degree of buffering than we can, right? But we were talking about evolutionary genes, and even in that front, some people are just way more capable of processing certain types of grain than others, certain types of fats than others, and so on. For some kids, it might really be a very good idea for anyone, it's a good idea to avoid too much sweet, etc. But some kids are grown or, I don't know, nurtured on cereals for their entire young lives. And while there's nothing inherently wrong with cereals, especially if they're whole grain and if there's not too much sugar in there, for some genetics, cereal is really not a good choice, right? And so if you know that, you may avoid causing your child having a lot of unnecessary inflammation. And that inflammation can drive cardiovascular, metabolic disease, even at quite a young, early age. Right? And again, I wouldn't say ban cereal because cereal is amazing stuff. We exploded as a society when we invented growing cereals or growing grain. But for some people, that really isn't the best choice.
So the final point, personalized supplementation, what's the easiest way to go about that?
Yeah. So it touches the same aspect that we spoke with all these examples. It's all about first knowing who you are. So I'll use my own example, for example. I mentioned vitamin D earlier, right? And the number of genes. And disclosure, I'm the worst genetic inheritance that you can imagine on the vitamin D story, right? So I've got really poor, let's say, ability to synthesize from sun. I have a very poor conversion in my liver, so activation. Then I have very poor intake or uptake into the cell, very poor vitamin D receptors, very poor transcription. So in terms of gene activation, etc. So I'm on the lower 20th percentile of my genetic code, right? But then I look at my circulating vitamin D in my blood. It's actually not bad, right? It's not optimal, but it's not bad. And as an entrepreneur, I don't really go out to the sun that much. Unfortunately, I should go out more often. I try to at least 5-10 minutes a day, but it's not enough. So what happened there was, it seems because I pay attention to my diet and my overall well-being and exercise and so on and so forth, I've been able to cultivate gut bacteria that are amazing super producers of vitamin D, right? I'm providing as a host the right environment that I give them something, they give me something, right? And it seems like this is almost again, a story that evolves through time when you can feel what your body needs, right? Again, if I just looked at my genome, so again, that brings us to the problem of today's industry is people do very much a silos approach. Like they do just genetic testing with one company and then say, oh, this is what my genes are telling me. This is what I should be doing. And then they start overdosing some stuff, right? That can be quite dangerous, right? Yeah, you take identical twins. One is a couch potato. One is an athlete. One lives inside and keeps on being under stress, etc. The other one is climbing mountains, eating healthy foods. They will have completely different biologies, right? In 20, 30 years time. So genetics is only what your cells can do, right? But you have to actually take a holistic view at what is really going on, right? So I still supplement with vitamin D to bring it from the okayish to the optimal, right? But if I just went by my genetics, I would start overdosing and that wouldn't be too healthy, right? So, so this is where you really then crunch the data. So when you think about personalized supplementation, then you have to think about, again, multiple aspects, which is what you can see in our platform, right? How much evidence is there for certain things? So with the nutritional deficiency, there is plenty of evidence. For example, if you're deficient in certain types of minerals and vitamins and so on, all the kind of correlations with the bad health outcomes, etc., are there. There are certain vitamin supplements and so on that are also quite strongly now starting to be correlated with more the longevity aspects of it, or at least healthier aging, right? For many others, however, we may either have anecdotal evidence or thousands of years of Ayurvedic tradition and so on. Is ashwagandha good for you? Hard to say. Again, yes, we can say because actually there's a lot of science growing in that field. But all I'm saying is you have to first take into account how strong is the evidence and what's my data, right? And so when you look at your data, then you really look at your metabolic pathways, your genetics, your gut biome, your current blood biomarkers, your epigenetic aging processes. And then you start addressing them in terms of the key need. Do I want to support my mitochondrial biogenesis, which are the right PGC1 alpha activators and so on? Or do I want to really just keep it low and make sure that I'm not deficient? Of course, you have to be mindful whether there's a systemic inflammation going on. You certainly want to take care of that. What's your glucose metabolism, lipid metabolism, and so on. So again, layers, right? When do you start going into senolytics? That's the question. How much is there a personalization data on quercetin and ficitin and so on? Not much, but is there solid data that quercetin might be a good thing in terms of kind of longevity strategy? I think so, right? What you want to know is it safe for me? Because you can take the simplest example. Again, I'll use something that probably most people are familiar with. I don't know, a vitamin E, right? A simple antioxidant, right? And we've shown, even our group has recently published a paper, vitamin E for a certain type of, let's say, genetics, which is not like we discussed earlier, it's not a genetic disease. It's a genetic uniqueness of one population versus the other population. So for a certain type of genetics, vitamin E is like fuel to the fire to any type of cancer. So it will actually increase your likelihood of catching cancer within the next decade or so, right? Versus for the other type of population, vitamin E is really putting out the fire, right? So it's helping your cells to fend better, and it's actually reducing your likelihood of catching cancer and so on, right? So even the simplest vitamin like that can actually be causing more harm than good, or vice versa. And for others, it's called quite neutral and irrelevant. So you're just wasting money, right?
Interesting. Super interesting. And it was lovely to have you on. Is there anything, any single point that you wish that your customers, your fellow research, your fellow entrepreneurs would really know about and take to heart that you think would absolutely move the needle in your field?
It's just call to action. The time is now that people start owning their biology, that people really get on this train of knowing their data, monitoring their data, starting to build their trend lines and seeing how they can start optimizing their health. The future of precision and preventive and longevity medicine is so insanely exciting ahead of us, with all the stuff that is even in the lab today in terms of, let me not even start getting into that because people might think it's science fiction, but it's really insanely exciting. And we have this one vehicle in life that we can rely on. And the more we maintain it in great shape, the more we can collect that data, know and be in the driver's seat, know the user, the operating manual, right? The more likely we're going to be able to see that exciting future. I would not go with a guesstimate on your own body, right? Know it, own it, right? That's how you start. And this is why we developed the new as a platform. Is really that's your digital twin, that's your data where you start, you upload your historical record, you start with systems approach now, then you monitor, retest. If you want every quarter, if you want every year, even if you do every 2 years, it doesn't matter, because what you want to do is first really know how can I start optimizing and then monitoring preventively, building that knowledge of my body and kind of being able to take action before things become a problematic pathology. So anyway,
Sounds like a plan. So where can people find you?
it's very simple. It's just www.thenew.com. Yeah, so it's the new
HENU.
means new actually means now in Dutch, right? So it's a call to action. So while you can play, it's a new life, new you, new era, but new means now, which is really the case, right? So very often people take New Year's resolutions and they say, oh, or they say, yeah, I know I should do something, this project at work and my kids and this, I'll do it next year, right? There's always some reason to not go for it, right? But I really think the time is now.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you for joining me on this transformative journey. Your presence in this community is truly valued. Now, you may not realize it, but your words hold immense power. They have the ability to reach others who may benefit greatly from the wisdom shared here. If you found value in what you heard, I kindly ask you to take a moment to subscribe to Biohacking Eve, leave a glowing review on your preferred podcast platform, and share Biohacking Eve with your friends and family. Your support helps spread the message of health optimization for women far and wide. Lastly, I want to express my gratitude to you for investing in yourself. By prioritizing your well-being, you serve as an inspiration to others. I'm eagerly looking forward to bringing you many more exciting episodes, and thank you for being a vital part of our community. Live long and prosper, my friend. The Biohacking Eve Health Optimization for Women podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content of this podcast is not intended to be substituted for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay obtaining medical advice for any medical condition they may have and should seek the assistance of the healthcare professionals for any such conditions. In addition, the information on this podcast does not constitute investment or financial advice.